record.
All right. All right. Yay. All right.
So
Yes.
with that,
So
Dr. Ramlo, go ahead.
the article is Key Methodology and its position in the mixed methods continuum. And I wrote this as kind of a follow-up to the book chapter I wrote with Isidore Newman, who was my good advisor guy, not to be confused with my bad advisor guy. Never have co-chairs of your dissertation, ever, 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 ever. Believe me. But I miss Isidore. He was a great guy. I learned so much from him. And he and a former colleague wrote a relatively small book on the mixed methods continuum. And that's what this article is based on. It is as far as citations, it has the third highest of my citations. The highest one is actually the one about 80 years of Q methodology that's in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. And the other one is the book chapter from the Sage Handbook on Mixed Methods, the second edition, using Q methodology and Q factor analysis and mixed methods research. Isidore did a lot with Q factor analysis. So I literally spent years on the phone and talking to him and visiting him, and talking about the difference between Q methodology and Q factor analysis. And it was really great because I had to explain things to him and give citations because that was always his expectation. And so it really helped me kind of jumpstart my understanding of Q methodology. The impetus for writing this actually was an article from the volume before by Paul Stenner, talking about Stevenson being resistant to Q methodology being placed within any theoretical framework, and then that that the community, especially Steve Brown and others, hold steady to the position that Q stands outside any other existing theoretical framework. And thus, right, Isidore, my focus was to demonstrate how Q fits into the contemporary research practice of mixed methods research, which really only started in the early to mid 80s.
Mhm.
I know that talking to Steve Brown, that his stand is, well, in Stevenson's time, especially in say the 30s, nobody differentiated quantitative and qualitative research. It was really this push inside psychology to be
Yeah.
positivistic, meaning to frame psychology based on the physical sciences, especially physics, or as I like to say, they had physics envy. And so we wrote about qualitative and quantitative research. And one of the things, this is where I want to start off, and then I'll pose questions and then hopefully come back to my notes. But when we wrote about constructivism, we wrote about it in really, well, one way. My conceptualization of constructivism comes from science education research and the learning of concepts, but also from a mixed method standpoint. Constructivism is usually associated with qualitative research, and that it's a misunderstanding that qualitative is words and quantitative is numbers, because that's really a very simplistic positionality, on those two types of research. Um, in the British dialect, which I was unfamiliar with at the time in 2011 when this was written, right? When they say, like, the Stanton Rogers and Stenner and Watts, when they say constructivism, they're talking about cultural products. So they're talking about factors not being viewpoints, but being cultural products, right? And they actually, I believe it's in the British dialect paper, talk about how they reject the idea that Q helps us differentiate viewpoints, and they talk instead about cultural products, right? So I want to start off by kind of posing that question to all of you. When when you think of what Q does, do you see it tied exclusively to culture? Do you see culture intermixed with viewpoints? Do you see viewpoints as purely subjectivity kind of removed from culture? What what do you perceive Q does as far as right coming up with factors, etc.? Rita.
Well, thanks, Sue, for this interesting question. And I want to share my thoughts with you on this aspect because it happened that we discussed this issue in the domain of behavior analysis. Uh, just to quickly put everyone on the same page, behavior analysis mostly is famous for basically two things: studying rats, which
Right.
is not, and
Mhm.
autism, which is also not. But I'm not going to do big conversation on that. But surely behavior analysis as a legacy from Skinner decide, and this is how I was trained, by the way, in Italy, decide to apply the principle of the principle of behaviors as discovered in the basic research by Skinner using rats. But he was studying behaviors, not wasn't studying rats or pigeons or whatever. Was studying the interaction of the organism with the environment. Decide to use this principle to understand society, which is a term that is often associated with the idea of a culture. One of the main point that we often discuss in behavior analysis, and I'm also part of the group, it's called the Cultural Behavioral Science International Network, which is a kind of a Q-Zoom. We only met twice a month, and we have people from all over the world, mostly US though. It's not so diverse like this Q group. We discuss, okay, what we should mean by culture. Uh, which honestly no one has already addressed really. So when you ask, is a cultural product different from viewpoints? Well, I guess we should first of all agree on about the term of culture and about the term of product and what we mean by viewpoints. Because again, I'm sorry, Sue, without reading your paper and everything which is connected with it, which usually when I do read a paper, I try to jump into the rich references that you and other authors do. I really couldn't. I mean, but the point is that let's define the object because as a first stance, I would say cultural product and viewpoints from a behavior analytic perspective. My perspective as a behavior analyst, it's uh, it's what we observe. So they are both product of my experience in the environment, and that's it. And these products are for humans like us most of the time, but not only, most of the time, uh, presented in a verbal form. So me talking to you, for example, it's with a specific content is a product, and it's a culture. If I follow the idea that the culture is the how the topography of my verbal behavior, other behavior are shaped by my specific experience as an Italian, as a PhD student, as whatever. So I don't know if providing a different interpretation of these two terms bring to a different implication, because this is the point.
Right.
Thanks.
And I think that really the importance here, and again, I was just not cognizant of any of the little subtleties going on in Q world when Isidore and I wrote this article. And so we had a it comes down to basically what you said and what Vivian put in the chat, that words matter, and how we define them or how we view them, how we subjectively, right, take them in, and how we mentally perceive them are not always the same. So, and you're right, we all belong to different groups, right? So, I could belong to a group of physicists, to tenured faculty, to people at the University of Akron, to horse lovers. Like, I could be all over the place, but that's, I don't think that that's how Watson Stenner and Stanton Rogers necessarily perceive it. I think they come from a very constructivist, as in cultural vantage point. Like, that's where their training came from. That's where they began. And so that's where they see Q fit, because that's what they understand. And that's kind of my take on that. And we have to remember too that when Stevenson was creating Q, it was at a time when psychology was really kind of downplaying qualitative and really embracing positivism,
Yeah.
not post positivism, but positivism, right? That they wanted a numerical answer to everything.
Yes.
Might be a simplistic way of putting it, but I believe that that's pretty much where they were going. And that's the culture that Stevenson was in when he came up with the idea of Q. I love this Vygotsky. My dissertation's full of him, which has nothing to do with Q, by the way. And so I part of, like, if you look in the article, right, there's that continuum of
Yes.
qualitative and quantitative.
Yes.
And although I spoke of testing theory and cited Stevenson, I don't, when he talked about testing theory, I realize now it was not in the way I perceive testing theory, at least as a physicist, testing theory, right? So his way of testing theory is that we might have theoretical constructs that we use to come up with the Q sample, but then we allow the participants to provide their own structure, right? And we could say that that structure, right, doesn't fit within the theoretical constructs that we use to develop the Q sample. And so maybe that theoretical construct is flawed, right? But that's more coming at it from an abductive viewpoint,
Yes.
right? We're not proving that their theory
Right.
is wrong. We're finding indications, right, that this might not actually be the case. This might be a researcher's perception of the case, but coming from physics education, I can tell you that students have perceptions of how force and motion work, and they are totally wrong. But they'll stick by them because they believe them,
Yes.
right? Even when confronted with evidence that that's not how it actually works. Because they can only, it's part of their worldview that they understand it, and therefore I must be wrong, even though I have degrees. That's okay. I've actually had students tell me I'm wrong. It's fun. I love teaching general education. Please, God, don't make me ever teach physics, intro to physics again. But but with that,
But
so
Sue, let's not, I don't want to move away from your original, if you don't mind, real
okay.
quick.
Oh, no, go back.
Your original question about I wrote factor being a cultural product.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I wrote in the chat what culture is. And I can understand what they mean by cultural, because I wrote this comment about culture, a person's system of shared beliefs and practices that define that particular group of person, which you just alluded to. So I can understand why they say that. It's still talking about perspective. It really is still talking about the perspective of the person, no matter what term you choose to use. And the last thing I want to say, that my favorite sentence in your entire article is this, and it's on page 183. it's two sentences. It says, yet this continuum indicates that what researchers need is a way to both build theory and to both build and test theory. So mixed methods can be used to close the gap and complete the cycle of research in the social and behavior scientists. As already mentioned, Q methodology can be used to build theory, but also to test theory. That's what I'm walking away with looking at this article again. So I get that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like, but when we say test theory and Q,
You're
it's like a
traditional.
lot of things. It's like how I've like way back when I had dissertation students doing Q. It's like how I used to tell them, don't use the word attitudes, because attitudes in psychology have a very
Different meaning.
specific
Yes.
meaning.
Yes, it does.
We, from our vantage point, like me, non-psychologist, although my father was a psychiatrist, but we look at attitude, perspective, viewpoint. These are all synonyms, but
Yes,
they're not in psychology.
that's true. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we always have to be careful about wording. And here I think that when those of us here in this room, when we say there's culture involved in subjectivity, we say, hell yeah, there's culture involved in subjectivity.
Yeah.
But that's different than saying it's a cultural, that the factors are
It's a
cultural
cultural product.
products.
Yeah.
Because if that was true,
True.
then anybody we surveyed in the same small town in Norway that is enveloped in the same culture would always end up on the same viewpoint. And the chances of that is pretty much zero, unless we have a really bad Q sample. So that's where I think that sometimes the words used by Q researchers are from their perspective. It's like the Q sample. It's from their perspective, their understanding of the word cultural product isn't necessarily our understanding of cultural product. Just like in on page 178, I said that, and Isidore, the Q sort is a constructivist process because they're
Yes.
constructing a representation of their view. But that's not what Stanton Rogers, Stenner, and Watts mean when they say that. And I wouldn't say that today because I know how it would be a misrepresent. It would be taken wrong, right? They already have their viewpoint. All they're doing is using the Q sample to give it structure.
Yes.
So their subjectivity exists. They are constructing a representation, but I wouldn't call it a constructivist process because they already know deep inside what they think. That's how I could have my student David, a pseudonym, long ago sort my epistemology Q sample and realize as he sorted that he was playing college all wrong because he wasn't constructing meaning. He was representing his viewpoint, reflecting on it and going, what the hell am I doing? This isn't what it is to be a college student. And that's the part of doing the Q sort that I think gets lost a lot when we talk about sorting, when we talk about that process, because it really is so much more than answering a Likert scale survey. I just did a Likert scale survey about like technology and sustainability, and they told me it would take 5 minutes. It might have taken me 10 because I had to write stuff because they let you write stuff at the very end, thank God. But you just look at it and you go, I don't know. Does it matter if it's positive or very positive? I don't know. I'll just say it's positive. Well, that took me half a second, right? But if I'm doing a Q sort and I'm pondering where I want to put this statement about academic freedom and what it means to me and my life experiences with academic freedom and how I perceive it, that's so much more in-depth thinking. It's so self-reflective, and I think there's a self-reflective component that saying Q sort is a constructivist process just kind of throws out that whole deeper aspect of the Q sorting process and kind of oversimplifies it. And I think that happens a lot. And I think that it happens a lot when we write up our Q study and reviewers read our Q study, because a lot of times they read our Q study from their research vantage point, which is non-Q. And they take our words and they see it in their way, their perception. So like I just got an article rejected. I won't go into details, but it was, I would say that the critique of the article was really the reviewer's expectation about what it should contain.
Yes.
And they missed the point about why I wrote it. But that's okay. I'll find another home. I've always found another home for everything I've ever written. So the most journals I've ever had to submit to, I believe, was 8. Which isn't as bad as my friend Tony Anagwabuzi, because I think his was 18. So I will just say, you get rejected. Oh my God, Steve Brown told me that he has a whole pile of things that got like revise and resubmit that he just never got back to. And I was like, oh no. I'm like, oh no, this shall live in eternity. It will be published. I just have to find a place, damn it. That's what I'm gonna do. So
Siobhan has a question too.
Oh yeah, I love questions.
Yeah.
All right, what's your question?
Thanks, Sue. Thanks a million. Look, I've been thinking about this and reading your article and thinking this is probably going to come up in my Viva in some shape or form. So going back, so I have been thinking in the last week, so going back to the surveys, be it a Likert scale or open-ended questions or whatever, and say that the person was interested in the results, all right? Mm-hmm. So when a person is answering those questions, be it a tick to say, yes, I think it's positive, or I agree, I disagree, or whatever, and then maybe the open-ended questions, it's still coming from a place of subjectivity. Would you agree?
Yes. But it's not as standardized as a Q sort. There's all kinds of bias effects and ceiling effects and what's it called? Is it called basement effects? But yes. But anyway, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, so that was my kind of, because I think I'll probably will have to defend my use of Q. And I just would, what would you say in terms of, I know you're saying it is absolutely more in depth, it's self-reflective, it's all of those really lovely things that I, absolutely believe in as well. But, what would be the absolute difference? Something very definitive, like, well, why didn't you use this? Or what makes it better than everything else,
Well, that's such a great question. And I have like a whole section in my book that's gonna come. I just submitted my index, so I'm getting close. I have a whole section on that, but in a nutshell, so the Q sort is self-referential. And when we factor analyze it and come up with our composite Q sorts, those are representations of self-referential data, right? There are still self-referential structures. Likert scales are, and Isidore knew Likert somehow, so he always made me say Likert because it's not Likert because he knew them. I was like, whatever. But anyway, but Likert scales are just, the perception is that we are quantifying their view. But in Q, we have a structure, right? In a Likert scale survey, they might do a structural validity check, which I did in my dissertation for the force and motion conceptual evaluation. Came up basically Newton's law, 3 laws of motion, acceleration, and velocity. It was incredible. Nobody on my dissertation committee thought it was except for Isidore. But that's how they do structure in a Likert scale survey to say that it's valid, right? But if you looked at the FMC, like the force of motion conceptualized, if you looked at their pre-instruction answers, there was no structure. Not a structure that fit what it did at post sort and that validity measure, which tells you that the structure is learned and there's lots of people who still don't abide by that structure, but that's a structure that exists outside of these people, right? It's a physics structure. It's based on that. When we do Likert scale surveys, there's all kinds of things that we do wrong. And it's just part of Likert scale surveys. I mean, part of my soapbox is always everybody thinks they can do a Likert scale survey because there's software that lets them do it. There's Survey Monkey. So, monkeys could do it. That's all you need to know. So there's Survey Monkey, there's Qualtrics, which we have at the University of Akron. But how I ended up in Q had to do with all of my critiquing of student evaluation of teaching, which is all about Likert scales. And it's all bullshit. That's what they are. They are all crap. Administrators like it. I once had an associate dean tell me that he knew student evaluation of teaching was bullshit, but it gave everybody a number and it made it easier for him.
Yeah.
And that is actually how Likert scales are often used. We get to have people have a number, but what does the number mean? Right? That therein lies the problem. So my explanation is usually this. So I've had a lot of department chairs, and one department chair, we had him, the first evaluation of him after his first 4 years was not glowing. By the second 4 years, we had new specific guidelines for chair review. And one of the items was to rate his performance as department chair on a Likert scale from 1 to 7. So my friend Lori chaired that review, right? And we met as a department faculty to discuss the results. And it was a 3.5. That was basically what this guy got. He got a 3.5 on this 1 to 7 scale. But when you read the qualitative comments, you just went, really? I don't think it's a 3.5. So I asked her to plot the answers, like the ratings. There were literally 1s and 2s, 6s and 7s. There was no one at 3.5. There was nobody at 4. There was no one at 3 because 3.5 did not represent anybody's damn view. Right. Nobody had a 3.5 view. Some people loved him because he left them alone and they could do whatever they wanted. And the other half of the faculty hated him because he provided no support. And when people who loved him didn't want to do anything, he just gave us. But we rated him on a Likert scale.
Yeah.
And what did we do? We found the mean, which statistically is incorrect because it's not a continuous data. It's not a continuous data, right? It's categorical.
Yes.
So there's so many things wrong with Likert scales. And just like qualitative research, we present the findings almost always, 99% of the time in aggregate. Just like Lori did when she said that our chair got a 3.5. But he didn't get a 3.5. He got 1s and 2s and 6s and 7s. There were 2 viewpoints. There were 2 totally different stories going on. And you had to look at that plotting and then read the qualitative comments to understand what was going on. To me, that's why mixed methods make sense. I've seen way too much misuse of quantitative data, including right now at my own university, because there always needs to be that qualitative part. I'm a physicist. I love numbers. I went into physics because I love math. I never even took high school physics. I do everything the hard way. But I can tell you, even from physics, being able to solve the problem doesn't mean you understand the problem.
That is correct.
You need
Yes.
a qualitative part to show that you understand the problem.
Yes.
And to me, that's always been the beauty of Q, is that it's the best of both worlds. And it's blended in a way that you can never separate out the qualitative and the quantitative part. I think that that's why people like Steve Brown and others, more old school people who knew Stevenson, like to stick by the Q is its own thing. But when Stevenson from 35 until his death in 89, mixed methods wasn't really a thing. Mixed methods was just getting off the ground, right? In the last 4 years of his life. And I'm sure because it was not in psychology, right? And probably not in journalism and advertising. So I'm sure that that was all missed. And I think I will stand by like the continuum thing, the little, right, the little table 2 with the Q's in the center, except for subjective purpose. But I think that if I wrote this paper again, and it's kind of said in here, but maybe not stressed enough, that the blend of qualitative and quantitative, does it make Q unique? Yes, Q is very unique. It's the only research methodology that I know of that uses self-referential data collection, right? And there's many things about it that are completely unique. But everybody agrees that it blends qualitative and quantitative. Stevenson wrote that it blends qualitative and quantitative. And to me, saying it's a mixed method helps us explain to people outside of our house what's going on here.
Yes.
Right? Because the quantitative people all tell us we don't have enough data, right? We don't have enough data and we didn't do our factor analysis right. And by the way, where is the expert validity, et cetera, on our concourse and QSIP? The qualitative people go, holy moly, you're using that fancy math stuff and we don't understand it. We kind of don't like it.
Yes.
Like, is there another way that you could analyze it? Right? And then there's always, the truly off the rails quantitative person who tells you should use cluster analysis because all they see is that we group people based on their sort and not factor arrays being the most important part. It's not about the factor matrix. It's about the factor arrays. That's what we care about. Our methodologists look at the matrix. That's what they like. The factor matrix tells the story. For us, the factor matrix only tells us who's on which factor. And then we can say, well, there's men and women on factor 1, 2, and 3. And, there's academics and non-academics and, and none of the demographics that we collected made any difference about what view they ended up on. And then there's always some quantitative person who says, well, why didn't you ask these other demographic questions? Right. And it's because it's not going to matter. That's why it's not going to matter. But it's so hard for those two. It's hard for them to perceive mixed methods. There was a woman who I think thankfully retired from my university, whose stand was that you couldn't mix methods. It was just impossible. She's kind of a kooky lady and very quantitative. But explaining that Q mixes qualitative and quantitative and explaining that it's a mixed method, which does not require us to change any philosophical aspects, epistemological, ontological aspects of Q, right? Unlike Watson Stenner and Stanton Rogers who say that we need to throw out the words of subjectivity and talk about cultural products. There is no such thing going on in mixed methods. The basis of mixed methods is that we have qualitative and quantitative and that they're not a dichotomy. as mixed methods grows and finds its defining ways, right? Kind of like Stevenson, right? It keeps changing, it grows. And so it started off with, we have a qualitative part that informs our quantitative part. And since then, it's really emerged as something so much more than looking at two separate types of research and using two different times, two different ways. Instead, mixed methods is becoming more and more, right, a hand holding between qualitative and quantitative. But I guess I'm not really sure how to convince the more old school people that saying Q is a mixed method doesn't take anything away from its uniqueness. So I guess and Rita has her hand up. So
yeah, Rita, because she's got to go
Roella.
soon. Let's get Rita first and
Yes.
then Roella, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue, for this very interesting example of Likert analysis on your chair department, the one who get the 3.5,
Yeah.
to discover that no one gave a 3, but actually you have people, a group of people, 1 and 2 and 6 and 7. It was a very interesting things. Thank you. And also I want to say that, yes, there are people who, well, why you don't use a cluster analysis? I say, yeah, it's different thing. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, what I would like to hear your ideas about the fact that beyond your explanation as to why survey Likert scale is has so many flow difficulties, I would like to add the fact that we often discuss these things, that in the Likert scale, in a survey or questionnaire that use the Likert scale, participants are asked to provide, I would say, their viewpoints, honestly, but on each item individually, independently. Right. I would say honestly that when they pick 1 or 2 for your chair department, or they are still expressing, they are still self-reference, honestly, but the limit is that they address, and this is what I like about the Q approach, is that in the Q approach you have still, let's assume, the same number of items, the same exact item, but you need to relate each other in relation to all of them. It's not just you, as you often say this point. I'm not saying actually nothing new, yes, but I would like to remind this, or to keep in mind this idea of that in the Q, we provide a whole, a complete viewpoint about your chair department, not about how much was his support from 1 to 7. It's more than that. So that was my point. To thank you for these things.
Oh, thank you,
Roella.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Rita, what you just said relates actually to what I wanted to say, is if we had in a Likert scale type of scenario, if there was a block where you could, let's say, whatever, right? So you're giving it 7 or 2 or whatever. If there was a little block where each time you had to rationalize why you give that, we would have been able to get self-reflection more in, right? But that would still not be Q, because those little things that you, of course, one could then create a concourse of reasons why people put somebody on a Likert scale where, or whatever they analyzing, use those comments for a concourse and create another, actually a Q sort about that person or about that thing, which could be very interesting. But it would still not, exactly as you pointed out, it would still not be to the depth of Q, because the different self-reflections, let me call it that, or bits of reasons would not speak to one another. And that's one of the magic of Q. So it's, for me, it goes 3D or 4D, and I think that's why it's quantum and not where Likert is, for me, maybe maybe a page. Q is not even a cube. It's a cubed cube or something like that. I don't know enough about physics, but so that's my one comment. Because if you engage with people in dialogue, when they do whatever type of something like that, you could get that depth of understanding. But now that type of methodology prohibits you from doing that, because that would be seen as if you're interfering now in the process of the person judging or peer evaluating or whatever you're using it for. So one of the reasons, and I really think you put it, your article is wonderful, Sue. And strangely, it was one of the first Q methodology articles that I read. So it actually helped me to understand, okay, because I did a bit of research on mixed method and so on. I'm like, okay, so now I see where it is. Reading it again after the past, I think it's about 5 years ago that I read it, or 4 years ago that I read it the first time, I suddenly love it, that I understand it so much better. I'm not saying I'm all there yet, but and that is the value of then doing a Q study or two. Is that suddenly when you read an article about a Q study, you actually have that referential way just by reading the article, because you've gone through it. So for me, the difference is, and I love what Dana said
Yes.
when you spoke of the question of let me just go back there. You asked, what is it? I think of perspectives, viewpoints that are shaped by culture. So for me, the big difference is, if we think of viewpoints as cultural viewpoints, right? It is a stereotyping. But if we admit to whatever our perspectives are, whether individual or then in a queue where it is a factor, have been influenced by culture, we get away from stereotyping, any form of stereotyping, because it's always the individual. And that's why in my study I worked with Deleuze and Guattari, because they say we are always becoming. Our perspectives are always becoming.
Yes.
Our ways of being are becoming. And therefore we cannot stereotype. So it's never, and Q captures that. It's never a frozen, we can have frozen moments, but 2 years from now, I do the same, or tomorrow I do the same Q sorting, and I might change my mind. So there's that becoming aspect that is so wonderful. And that is the deepness of qualitative that is there. Yeah, and I find it pity that all people think that answers are more important than questions, because Q allows us to question and not to give the answers. And so I just want to say, I think your article is still incredibly relevant.
Absolutely.
And reading
Yes.
it today, I'm like, yes, yeah, this is what part of what got me into Q.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I wanted to ask about the null hypothesis, though.
But
The
go ahead and
falsification.
ask. Go ahead. You want to ask a question? Continue, because I want to make sure Dana has an opportunity. Riley, you want to ask about the null hypothesis? You can.
I just want to say, if we could speak about that if there's time, but I'll lower my hand now.
Okay. Let's. You want to deal with that now, Sue, or you want to deal with Dana's?
I want to do Dana's question. So she asked why at the top of that continuum Why is the Q over by subjective purpose and not by objective purpose? And that's a great question. It's really because we look at subjectivity from as an objective position as possible, but the purpose is still to examine subjectivity. Whereas subjectivity typically is framed as something to eliminate. It tampers with the positivist, post-positivist means of measuring. And so they see it as a problem and we see it as an opportunity. Because really, right, I'm back to I did this Likert scale survey about sustainability and technology. And at the end, they wanted me to comment about some of like the placements. They was just an opportunity to comment. And I was like, well, because I can't say what the effect of technology is on sustainability, absolutely, because people play a role and people are unpredictable. They come from different positions. So, which position has the power to enact technology in different ways, right? That's dependent on power and having a voice. And that's very different than looking at it from this lens where there is no objectivity, there's no subjectivity, there's only objectivity. And that's how I think they perceive this survey, because that's certainly how I read it. That, can technology improve humankind? Sure. Will it? I don't know. Right? It depends. If Dr. Evil has it, then maybe not. If Dr. Good has it, maybe. But then it's a big power play. So there's so much more involved that their survey could never really get to the depth of my subjective perspective, because it didn't give me an opportunity except for my long-winded response in their wee little box, which I was glad let me keep writing.
So I have hopefully a quick question so that we can cover Rola's question. So this is early on in your article under Stevenson's on the subjective and objective. Within the study of behavior, Stevenson's take issue with behaviorism as a study of behavior that is simply objective while excluding the subjective. So then he says, how then can one observe the inner self of someone else scientifically? Stevenson's answer was Q methodology. Still, Stevenson reminds us that Q methodology was designed so that it can be applied to study both the subjective and objective behaviors. So my question is, how can Q study objective behavior when behavior is subjective?
Well, I think it's not, the behavior is real, then that makes it objective. But why we do things usually has to do with what our perspective is, right? So if I think that, I don't know, sustainability is imperative for the future of the earth, right? Then I'm going to do things like recycle and use biodegradable detergents, right? I'm going to do all these things because of how I feel. What I do is objective because it's real, right? I recycle. I'm a mad woman recycler. And when I teach my plastics course, I spend a lot of time talking about the importance of recycling because that's my subjective viewpoint. I mean, sure, it's based on scientific knowledge, but there are people who have access to that same knowledge and reject it because that's not part of their subjective viewpoint. And so they don't recycle. They're the people who throw unrecyclable things in the Target bin for the little grocery bags that are only recyclable separate. Don't throw them in your recycling. They can't be recycled at the regular recycling place. They need special recycling.
Is that another way of saying that the behavior itself is objective, but the reason why you do it is okay? Okay, all right, all right.
Yes,
Just make
you
sure.
got it. You
I want to
got
make
it.
sure I'm not missing that, because
No, you got it 100%.
that's one of the challenges in psychology. Psychologists in general, I hate to use the word afraid. I think psychologists are afraid to take that deep dive because we're not trained to do that. We are so trained to either do it this way or that way. And then this aspect of thinking of examining the thinking that underpins behavior kind of frightens psychologists because there's no real training. We don't have training to do that, and that's the big challenge for psychologists and psychology.
Well, and you can't fit people into little boxes.
I know, but that's the training. What are you going to do? I mean, they use cognitive behavior therapy on everybody, not modifying or changing, not looking at Johnny to see, well, what the hell is going on with Johnny? We don't look at Johnny like that, because we're not trained to do that. We just know he needs cognitive behavior therapy. Like, but what is Johnny thinking? What's in his brain? What makes him behave and do what he does? And we don't go there, the collective we.
Right.
Anyway.
And if you don't know why he does what he does, how do you know how to fix it?
Hello. Anyways, they don't like me out here, but that's all right.
That's okay. They didn't like Stevenson either.
Rolla, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Ro?
No, I was just saying, Q, when I read that part again on the falsification, why that and not verification?
Right.
I sort of, because you can never say in a Q study, I mean, will there ever be really only one perspective, one factor? Could there be one factor? Or could there be two factors? There can't be two factors if they are the same. With other words, so why I didn't understand really why why that null hypothesis. But of course, I don't do it's not that I'm scared of numbers. I loved numbers and physics at school, and I love science and all of that. But I didn't understand really why it was there in the article. So could we stop on that, or am I the only one wondering about that?
Yes. And I will say now that I probably wouldn't talk about falsification. Falsification is something very much from the quantitative realm, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way, in a lot of ways, I know Carrie and I have talked about like the null hypothesis thing and how you could have a null set Q sample. But I think that even if you just gave people numbers 1 to 20, you would end up with like people who love even numbers and people who love odd numbers. And I think in the end, people have opinions about literally everything, even if they don't know they have opinions about them. But that said, there's not a way to do falsification. So like I'm dealing with my IRB again. Oh, I love them because, I can just literally copy and paste from the last IRB, which was 6 weeks ago and got approved without any problem. Just change the purpose of the study and who I'm recruiting. And yet I will get pushback. This time they had to have the link to my Q survey, as I like to call it for the IRB people, because otherwise they have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But I had to include the link so she could see that I actually had a consent form and that you had to click OK basically before you could enter it.
Yes.
But I was going somewhere with this whole thing. Falsification. Oh no.
No.
In other words, I think with other words, for you were saying for every time you apply, you just change a few things.
Right.
Does
and yet
that
you get
mean
pushback. Well, and part of it is because again, she's coming from her wheelhouse that has never seen Q, right? And to her, I use the word survey only because I learned early on that if I called it a Q sort and tried to explain it, I got a million frigging questions
Yes.
from
Yes.
faculty who had and didn't read the whole thing
Yeah.
closely. And I think it's the same thing here. So she's thinking I'm using Qualtrics, even though I explain in there, like even in the consent, what you're going to do, right? I explain the purpose of the study. There's always a little blurb about Q and how it's not really a survey, but it fits under that umbrella for the IRB to be exempt. And I think that, well, I guess we're 5:03, but I'll wrap up. It's so difficult for us to communicate Q ideas because people outside of Q are like my little physics students who believe, right? When they read what we're doing, they immediately have a conceptual understanding that's based in their experience, right? So if they're quantitative researchers, their expectation is that we use factor analysis, and therefore we must meet the criteria for quantitative research. And when we say that the Q sample is, right, the sample from the population of statements, they ignore it, even if it's in our paper, because that's not their understanding of what a sample from a population is. And that makes it difficult for us. I think it's one of the reasons why I found it so much easier to publish Q articles by just saying that it's a mixed method. And my cover letters always say that this is a very unique method. And now it says, because of a recent pushback from a journal, now it says, just because a researcher has done one or two Q studies doesn't mean they actually understand the methodology. And so therefore, I am giving you these names of people who have done many Q studies who understand it. Please call on one of them because I'm trying to prevent the great pushback stuff. And I mean, recently I had and this has happened so many times where I have a reviewer, it's always reviewer two. Why is that? Who says, well, I did a Q study, or my friend did a Q study, or I had a grad student do a Q study once. And then they tell you everything you're doing wrong. And I just want to go, hey, man, I have done like 60 of these. How many have you done? But I think that because Q is so unique, I don't know. I don't know by saying Q is unique and it doesn't fit in any box, does us any good for getting anything published outside of our own little journal. And that's a problem because no, I don't say nobody reads OS, but people don't find it. Although I will tell you that I asked artificial intelligence, Chat GPT, where a good place to publish a Q article was, and its number one choice was operant subjectivity. So, but for the most part, it's relatively small. We're not indexed. People don't read it. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like the idea of having the reading circle, specifically
Yes.
read articles in operant subjectivity, because it helps people go there and explore what all is up there. Because there's so many great articles. There's a ton of them from Steve Brown and Stevenson. I mean, it's like free manna from heaven. I mean, what a great resource. And it's so sad that people don't use it. And instead, I read a lot of journal submissions where they read Joe Schmo. Who is this person? I don't know, but they cited them endlessly. And it's unfortunate because Joe Schmo is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? He took Q and then put it into his framework.
Yeah.
But what he did wasn't Q. And I don't know how else we battle that except to publish in OS, but also elsewhere and help people understand what Q really is, opposed to some Joe Schmo's perception of what Q is.
Yeah, we're not gonna give up, Sue. It may not be in our lifetime,
Okay.
but it will have its presence in the universe. No, don't give up. So we're not quitters here.
Oh no.
Yeah,
I never give up. I'm stubborn as the day is long. I
with
learned a lot from my little Italian grandma.
that, we do have to go. A reminder: we'll have this downloaded and sent out so everybody can have access to it. So with that, thank you all so much, Sue. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank you.
revisiting this
Thank you
wonderful
so
article.
much.
Vivian,
Have a great rest of the week, everybody.
can I
All
ask
right.
Vivian,
Thanks for
are we stopping for Christmas?
improving my
Wait, I'm
thanks
sorry.
for improving my crappy day.
No worries, no worries. I'm gonna stay
All
on,
right. And
but those
yes,
who have to go.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Yes.
everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Siobhan, I'm staying on.
See you next time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Siobhan, what was the
Thank you so
question?
Just, are you stopping for Christmas or what is
Nah, we don't stop for Christmas. Is it Christmas Day? Wait.
It's say Wednesday week, so next Monday.
We're still on.
Okay.
If only if it's New Year's Day, I think.
Okay.
Only if it's on the holiday do we stop. Hey, this is my life. So
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know what I make it. I'm trying to get worked. I've like
well, do your
lots
thing.
of
If you
stuff
don't
to-
have, listen, we're here for you. We're here for you whenever you want to be here.
Definitely in January I'll be back with
No worries. Enjoy your holiday, okay? And thank you so much.
and happy Christmas to you both.
Thank you as well.
Fab.
Thank you.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody. Bye, Siobhan.
Bye.
Bye, Viv.
Ro, I'm gonna send this link to
Tumiku.
Miku, and I'll copy you
Thank you.
too so that she can
Yes.
upload it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a
Woo.
fantastic time.
Thank you, honey. All right, bye-bye.
Is your grandson okay? I wanted to ask earlier.
His mother is here.
Okay, fantastic.
He's not. He's a little. He has a fever. He doesn't feel well. That's why he's screaming. So
Ugh,
he's waiting for me to come and soothe him. So I'll
go,
do.
Grandma.
Yeah, Grandma. That's what I do. Hello. Take care, sweetie.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, I want to say the chat. Go up to, let me see. Let me just stop the recording.